So welcome distinguished speakers and delegates from UK and other countries all around the world to our Uniting for Peace annual conference on Are We Already in World War III and Can a Roadmap for Peace Change Culture of War to Culture of Peace? My name is Vijay Mehta, Chair of Uniting for Peace, board member of GAMIT, which is Global Alliance for Ministries and Infrastructures for Peace, and an author of How Not to Go to War. Allow me to say a few words about our organization, Uniting for Peace. Working since 1979, 44 years ago, United for Peace is a non-profit organization devoted to creating and promoting a global culture of peace, non-violent alternatives to ending war, poverty reduction, establishing ministries and departments for peace and peace centers. Dear friends, today we are living in one of the most dangerous times in history, with war raging in at least 3 continents. In Middle East between Israel and Palestine, in Europe between Ukraine and Russia, and war in Sudan and Africa. And there is no end to mass killings, bloodshed, suffering on a daily basis. And the conflict here has all the bearings of a broader conflict, maybe entering into World War III. So today, our distinguished speakers will give us some clues or some solutions as to how can we be effective as a peace movement and what we can do about to stop this bloodshed and killing. So with these words, I hand over to the chair for today, Rita Payne, Uniting for Peace Vice President, former BBC editor, and former president of Commonwealth Journalists Association. Please welcome Rita Payne.
Well, good evening to you all. And obviously special thanks to Vijay, who has been fighting, if that's the word, for peace, campaigning for, I've lost count of how many years, Vijay, from my days at the BBC. And it is, as you've said, and everybody's noted, in recent years, it seems to have got worse and worse. I mean, Ukraine was a shock. That was open, naked, it seemed, invasion. And then now we've had this flare up in the Middle East, which looks as though it could actually draw everybody in all other countries. And what is really worrying is at the moment you have other factors which have changed, which means that now there is disinformation, fake news, and you don't know what to believe. It is totally bewildering now to know what the facts are. I mean, one prime example, of course, is who attacked this hospital in Gaza. And it's very difficult to really think of a way forward, to think about peace. And I'm hoping with all our distinguished panelists, we will able to be able to find some route, even at what seems like a very, very dark time, to show some hope somewhere. I mean, there have been some attempts, and I know the BBC has been criticized because there have been Palestinian and Israeli peace activists who've been calling for peace. But this has not been highlighted in the mainstream press. And although I'm part of the mainstream press, I do worry that the grammar is one. So this is something I hope we will explore as well. So can I now just invite Vijay Mehta, our chair, Uniting for Peace, board member, and author, of course, of How Not to Go to War. So, Vijay, are we already in war? There's so many forms of war. There's cyber war, there's information war. It's the war of nature war has changed from the last few years. So I'd like to hear your views on what is happening and what one can do about it.
Okay, thanks, Rita. And dear friends, welcome again. And as I said before, we are living in one of the most dangerous times in history, with wars in Ukraine, Sudan in Africa, Palestine, Israel in Middle East, inflicting endless suffering and misery. And on a daily basis, relentless killing goes on. We are witnessing horror and bloodshed every day. Dear friends, Ukraine war is a proxy war between Ukraine, USA, and its NATO allies against Russia, China, and global South, who refuse to be pushed into supporting the war. It's an ugly war, and more it's prolonged, it can turn to a nuclear strike, into World War III and end of civilization. The war between Israel and Palestine is a mass murder on a large scale, full of horror, which will affect both Israelis and Palestinians for years to come. And it has the sign of escalating to a broader regional conflict with participation of Arab countries supporting Palestine cause like Iran and Hezbollah, and Israel, the USA, European Union, UK, all these countries supporting Israel with weapons, hardware, intelligence, etc. It's a war between oppressor and oppressed, in which Palestinians are fighting for their freedom, security, dignity, respect, rights to live in their own country. The question instantly comes to mind: how seemingly mentally normal men in high positions are permitting such evil atrocities and slaughter to happen. Rand Corporation think tank outlines plans for USA to balkanize the Russian Federation, neutralize Moscow, and encircle China. If one is thinking of starting World War III, then one could come up with a better idea. The planned enlargement of NATO eastwards and to accept Finland and Sweden as NATO members proves that NATO is a vast military pact of expansionist nature, and all the promises West made to Russia of not expanding eastwards were nothing more than a pack of lies. Dear friends, there is a major difference between the US resource wars for oil, etc., of Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and the present war between Russia and Ukraine. There was hardly any opposition to the war in those countries, and US military could prevail in all those situations, occupying foreign territory. However, the difference of Russia and Ukraine war is fundamentally Russia is a nuclear armed country with massive firepower, which is quite hard, if not impossible, to defeat. So there is a proxy war going on between NATO, US and its allies, and a frontal war between Ukraine and Russia. The main intention of NATO is to prolong war and weaken Russia by supplying Ukraine with money, troops, and military hardware. A perfect scenario to turn a regional war into a European war or even World War III. the consequences of nuclear weapons being used. The longer the war continues, the more likely that a direct war between US and Russia can happen. So, dear friends, what can we do all about it? In 2016, my book, Peace Beyond Borders, I have laid out that after 75 years of relative peace and 7 decades of European integration driven by quest for peace in Europe, we are in the midst of a war which has no sign of ending soon. The quest for peace has given to a war project with European Union member states and US sending heavy weapons to Ukraine and Israel to continue the war. And European Union is considering a nuclear option, which is a frightening scenario. So, dear friends, unlike COVID, in which most of the countries of the world cooperated and were on the same page, countries of Asia, Africa, and Middle East are not supporting the Western war and their propaganda against Russia and have refused to impose any sanctions in Russia and are doing trade as usual. They see the apparent hypocrisy and double standards at play as Western countries are behaving differently in supporting war in Ukraine, but not elsewhere, that is Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. How can the violence stop? And what can we do for building a peaceful, multipolar world? How can we bring all the parties to the table? As military victories never bring peace, only dominance and revenge. And to end this war and achieve a peaceful solution needs courage, determination. The destruction and killing and suffering of World War II, in which over 85 million people died, is a recent memory, history, and not a distant memory. In no circumstances it should be allowed to happen again. And we should stop World War III happening, as there is already enough blood and carnage happening in Ukraine and Gaza. Dear friends, we cannot achieve peace through supplying heavy weapons, as it heightens the risk of World War III. And also, rearmament is by the countries is detrimental to their own population, as it means less investment in healthcare, jobs, and education. Increase in military spending cannot be justified, as we are in the midst of fuel crisis and there is widespread hunger throughout the world, as the current food crisis demonstrates. Dear friends, my book published in 2019, How Not to Go to War, proposes an alternative and radical solution to end war, which is by establishing ministries and departments of peace and peace centers in all the countries of the world, promoting culture of peace and non-violent solutions for domestic and international conflicts by addressing the underlying root causes of violence in society and alternative peace strategies. Dear friends, in the past, non-violent movements have emerged as powerful forces for change in various parts of the world. From Rosa Parks, who refused to give up her bus seat, to Malala Yousafzai, who stood up for girls' education in face of violence, to the Arab Spring in the Middle East, to the umbrella movement in Hong Kong, and the global climate strikes led by Greta Thunberg are examples how non-violent resistance remains relevant in contemporary global struggles. Dear friends, let me end by saying ending violence and killing is what is not needed today. What we need today urgently, peace negotiations to start. And there is urgent need to open borders and humanitarian aid to flow in the Gaza region. We need to work towards ending this war and culture of militarism. And it's astounding, there is not a single peace negotiation or talk of ceasefire. And let me end by a quote from John F. Kennedy, who said in his address to the United Nations in 1961, mankind must put an end to war, or war will put an end to mankind. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vijay, for explaining so clearly the picture, putting it on context, the developments, and also talking about various movements that have been successful. And let's hope that these will be heeded, whether in the heat of the moment now, one can expect this message to be accepted. I'm not sure, and I'm wondering if any of our other speakers might have their views on it. So may I now invite Medea Benjamin, political activist, co-founder of Code Pink, author, War in Ukraine. Is that all right? Medea?
Yes, can you tell me if you can hear me? I'm in a noisy place. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, good.
Yes, we can.
So
Yeah.
I'm in a noisy place, which is the US Congress. And I'm here because it's so important to try to change the positions of people in the US Congress. But I can tell you, it is an uphill battle. We have been trying to stop the war in Ukraine, and it has been so difficult to get one Democrat to come out to call for a ceasefire and negotiations because it's a Democrat in the White House, and they are supposed to fall in line and let their leadership in the White House, who is taking us into World War III, lead the way. And thank you, Vijay, for laying things out in terms of the danger that we have for a nuclear war. And let me just say, in terms of Ukraine, the tremendous danger of a World War III spreading throughout the region of Europe. And it is very disconcerting that here in the United States, we cannot get people who call themselves liberals, progressives, who have joined us in the past in opposing war and are in positions of power to take that same position today. The President of the United States tonight is going to address the country and probably ask for another $100 billion for war in 3 different places that could lead us into World War III. One is in Ukraine, the other is for Israel, and the other is for Taiwan. So you just have to wonder, what is the insanity coming from the White House that is willing to increase the chances for World War III or a nuclear war breaking out in 3 different places. It is so distressing. The only thing that brings me hope is being on calls like this and seeing the reaction that is happening on the ground. So first, let me just take Ukraine. The groups that have been coming together have mostly been the US and Europe. And we have come together physically in Austria during the summer, 32 countries represented, to talk about how we could learn from each other to build our movements, learning from some of the European groups, how they've managed to get the trade unions involved, the difficulties of getting members of parliament and what has worked, the importance of trying to broaden our coalition, and the one of the particular difficulties around Ukraine has been this question of whether it's good or bad to try to form left-right alliances, since in some countries it's only the officials in the right-wing parties that have been willing to take a stand calling for a ceasefire in Ukraine. That's the case in the United States. We're the only ones who are talking about even blocking money for Ukraine, and have done it, have tried to in the past, have been from the extreme right in the Republican Party, which makes our work, those of us in the progressive movement against war, extremely difficult. When it comes to the issue of Gaza, we just had some marvelous, really spectacular demonstrations here in the United States yesterday, organized by Jewish groups, Jewish Voice for Peace, and a young Jews called Not in Our Name. And spectacular in that it was thousands of people and hundreds of them getting arrested in the halls of Congress. And this is so important because in the US right now, in Congress, it is a very heavy lift just to get people to call for a ceasefire when the people of Gaza are facing genocide. So far, we have only been able to get 17 members of our Congress to join in with a resolution calling for a ceasefire. You have to wonder, where is the humanity of people in this Congress that can't even recognize the absolute dire, urgent necessity of calling for a ceasefire in Palestine right now. The other, I know we don't have much time. I just want to talk in some ways about the positive ways that we are building. I think building as broad coalitions as we can to oppose these wars is so critical. The importance of getting people in the environmental movements to understand that war is the greatest destroyer of the environment, that the Pentagon is the #1 non-state polluter in the world, and that there will never be the money needed to address the environmental issues if we don't take it from the money that our governments are spending for war. The other is to bring in the labor movements, which has been very tough for us in the United States, but I know in some other countries they have been able to do that. Movements like Black Lives Matter, movements like here in this country, people who are fighting to get healthcare and education that is not leaving people in debt for the rest of their lives, bringing them into the movement to try to move the money from the Pentagon into human needs. The other is addressing the military-industrial complex, like Vijay had mentioned, the companies that actually profit so tremendously from war and are so involved in our system of governance as well, recognizing things like the fact that our Secretary of Defense in the United States, which should be called Secretary of War, came from us directly from Raytheon. And so there are more and more actions and coalitions coming together to try to directly address these weapons companies. I was on a call just a half hour ago where they announced a new organization in the United States that gets its strength and inspiration from the UK, called Palestine Action, that directly goes after things like Elbit systems that provide so many of the weapons for the Israeli military, and just announced a US chapter of Palestine Action today that is going to try to be shutting down the different Elbit offices around the United States. And one other area where I take some inspiration here in the US is the diaspora. Now, unfortunately, many of the countries that have immigrants to the United States, for example, end up being coming from the right and are very conservative members of our society. But there are also people that recognize that our policies are hurting their people back home. And so, for example, in the coalitions to try to bring peace to the Korean Peninsula, the Korean Americans are extremely involved and active and taking a leadership role. When we talk about war, we should also talk about economic warfare, the sanctions that the US has imposed in so many places around the world. And there we see in communities like the Cuban American community really stepping up to take a leadership role in saying that the sanctions the US is imposing on places like Cuba are a form of warfare and must be opposed by any member of the community here who cares about their relatives back home. And finally, I just want to say that I think we take strength from each other. When we see in Ukraine, for example, that the global South is not going along with this proxy war and will not side with NATO and the West, that gives us great strength. When we see that there is a growing coalition to oppose NATO itself, and I hope some of the others will talk about that, that gives us strength. We had that incredible global day of action around Iraq back in 2003 that is still known as the day the world said no to war. And we need another global day where the world comes together and says no to war. I know in the case of Palestine, there's already calls for a global day of action in the near term, but we definitely need more global solidarity. We need to learn from each other, take inspiration from each other, just as we're doing on this call. So thank you for the invitation to be part of this.
Thank you, Medea. There are so many points that you've raised that are worth noting and following up. And I thought what's encouraging is to hear about the coalitions that you're forming. And also what's interesting too is the role of the diaspora that you've highlighted. So I think the picture's mixed, but I do feel and wish you success in what you're trying to do to try and bring some sense and some calm into the feeling atmosphere here. May I now just invite Tony Robinson, editor Presenza, an international news agency, and author Coffee with Silo and the Quest for Meaning in Life. So welcome, Tony. We look forward to hearing what you have to say. Tony?
I'm just trying to find him on the, hold on, just bear with me for a second.
I found him. Here we go.
Oh, right, God, you got it right. Great.
But it's not unmuting. Let me just see.
Where is he?
He's waving. Can you see him?
Oh, right. Okay, Tony, you okay? Unmute now, yeah?
Yes.
Good.
Yeah, lovely. We can hear you. Thanks.
Thank you, Bernie. Thank you, Rita. Thank you, Vijay, for the invitation to participate in this event, and thank you to all the other panelists. I'm looking forward to hearing what everyone else has to say. I was very surprised to get the invitation to be asked to speak on this panel. I don't get asked very often, so I'll give a little bit of an introduction. As was said, I am an editor with the news agency Presenza. I did say a few words about that before we got into the meeting, but presenza.com is our website. We publish news every day focusing on topics of peace, active nonviolence, the fight against all forms of discrimination, the development of human rights, and basically anything which is in the development of human progress. One of the things that characterizes us in Presenza is that we are more than journalists. In fact, some people might even question our journalistic ability, but we're also activists. Yeah, we are there working alongside activists in all different fields of social activity. We are supporting them in their causes. We are giving space to everything that they are doing, and we are working shoulder to shoulder with them in order to help them have access to the kind of information that they need, the kind of media information that they need in order to develop their campaigns. And also what we're trying to do is try and join together all of these different fields of social activism, because we believe that they're all caused by the same root problem. My own specialization is in the field of nuclear weapons, and I've been working in nuclear activism since 2006. I had the great pleasure in 2018 of writing producing a documentary called The Beginning of the End of Nuclear Weapons with a colleague of mine in Spain. And it was following the story of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons through from the negotiations going back in 2010, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty meeting kind of gave birth to a movement which was later on headed up by ICAN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and that eventually led to the negotiation and the actual coming into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we did a documentary on that. What I have concluded from all of this experience in nuclear activism is not good, actually. I have reluctantly come to the conclusion that international diplomacy doesn't work. I was very much concerned in my work as an anti-nuclear activist that already I could see that the work that already nuclear weapons are obsolete from any point of view of using them militarily in a battlefield. They're obsolete. Yeah, they don't do what a government would need to do in order to meet their strategic military aims. And already we know that there is a lot of development happening in new systems of weapons, which will finally make them completely obsolete. Yeah, we are seeing the autonomous weapons, the killer robots campaign, which is developing, and we are also starting to see the possibilities for small drones, which can be made very, very cheaply, armed with bullets and facial recognition software, to be sent in swarms to places to actually very surgically take out the kind of people that an enemy might want to do that. So I kind of came to the point when I thought, okay, we're going to do all this work to eliminate nuclear weapons, and the nuclear powers are going to say, okay, well, actually, you know what, that's fine, because we've got more lethal, more precise weapons now, which means that those ones are no longer necessary. So the peace movement is going to be constantly in a battle fighting against the latest form of weapons of mass destruction. And I think it's very instructive that the vast majority of countries in the world have signed up to the Chemical Weapon Convention and to the Biological Weapon Convention, because they know that the P5, the nuclear powers, know that actually those weapons are tiny in their ability to frighten people compared to what a nuclear weapon does. So okay, so then why is diplomacy not working? Why are we in the peace movement constantly fighting against the people in positions of power who want to maintain their weapons forever? It's because we have to look at the values on which our society is based. And we have to look also who is responsible for the situation that we're living in. Why doesn't diplomacy work? Because the United Nations is not where the people who make the decisions actually sit. The people who make the decisions are what I call the billionaires. And you don't have to be billionaires to be in this club, but I'm talking about people with enormous influence created either by the personal wealth that they have, by the position that they have as a head of state, whether that be as a monarch or a dictator or the head of a political party which has installed itself and gerrymandered the rest of the country so that they will always maintain power. Yeah, and we include in here the heads of all the multinational companies. We include also the head of the arms manufacturing companies and the media. And all of these people are in a kind of situation where they are working together, and even though they're from China and Saudi Arabia and Iran and the United States and Europe and wherever they may be, all of these people are working on incredibly selfish principles. Yeah, they are interested in their own greed, the maintenance of their own power at all costs, and they are prepared to do anything in order to maintain their apparent system of privilege. And that means that they would be prepared even to launch nuclear weapons. I'm sure that that could be a possibility. So we need to disarm these billionaires. We need to know who they are, and we need to take away their power. And I don't mean line them up against a wall and shoot them or guillotine them, as has been done in different revolutions. We need to disarm them. We need to take the toys away from them so that they can't play with them anymore. And we need to democratize this planet. Really, we need to devolve power down as far as we possibly can. But what's important here is we need to think about what are the values of the world that we want to live in? Because if we can do anything that we can imagine, yeah, science has shown you come up with an idea, scientists will find a way to do it, or human beings will find ways to make progress. Yeah, but what are the values that we kind of want to develop this world on? And I wrote about this in Presenter. And I'll put the link to the article in the chat. But I think for me, we need to start from the absolute sacredness of life and the planet. Yeah, the world that we live in has to be sustainable. Our society has to be sustainable. We are consuming resources on this planet at an alarming rate, and we need to be thinking about a sustainability which will allow for millions of generations to come, not only 5 years through to the next cycle when people are going to vote. Yeah, we have one planet. It is illogical, it is completely insane to allow human activity to continue to exhaust all the planet's resources. Secondly, we need to decide what is our highest value, because in our world today, the highest value is money. It's very clear. If you've got money, you can do absolutely anything you want. Yeah, from healthcare to anything. Yeah, if you have money, you can get power, prestige, sex, whatever you want. Yeah, the world that we need to move towards has to change that system of values. We need to put human life and the sustainability of the planet as the central values of this of our society. When we do that, weapons become obsolete. Very clear. You change the values, weapons become obsolete. Why would you, if you are valuing human life and the sustainability of the planet as your number one value, yeah, weapons just don't fall into that paradigm. Thirdly, I would say that we need to have a dignified life for all human beings, and this must be enshrined in the constitution of a new society. A world which allows individuals or groups to subjugate other human beings to a life of pain and suffering is what we have now, and it doesn't work. Furthermore, we need to create a society in which we all agree that war and the weapons of war are illegal. Yeah. We can never again allow a small group of human beings to impose their will on the vast majority under the threat of war and violence. Now, it is hoped that in the future, human beings will develop a capacity to prevent conflict from happening at source. And I think it's very encouraging to see the younger generations are increasingly concerned with the planet, but they're also increasingly concerned with the animal kingdom. More and more of them are becoming vegan and vegetarian. More and more the people in the younger generation are moving away from these paradigms of everything, basically. Sex, sexuality, gender, everything is becoming much more open and much more empathy towards people from different places and different cultures. And that's because they're so well connected on the internet. I mean, today, not even language is a barrier. The translation tools that are online means that anyone can communicate with anyone at all. And finally, we must recognize that violence is not only the physical act of harming another person. It's not just physical violence. It's not just war. Violence is also economic, psychological, sexual, cultural, moral, and there are many different ways. Yeah? Violence in all of its forms must be abolished, and we must educate the future generations with the tools for resolving conflict through non-violent personal and social transformation. What is going to be the way out of this current situation? It terrifies me, honestly, because you look around and the vast majority of people on the planet are asleep. They are not their own fault. You know, they're asleep to what's going on. Vast majority of the people are struggling to make ends meet. They don't even have time to turn on the news. They don't even have time to inform themselves about what's going on. They don't have the opportunity to balance. You know, well, what's the
Sorry,
information?
Tony, could you possibly, we passed the time for him, so we could just wrap up and then we can follow up later.
All right, by all means. So an awakening of a social consciousness, and that is what is going to be required, similarly to the end of the Second World War, where suddenly health services and welfare services were created all over Europe. And I will leave it there, and I look forward to questions in the Q&A. Thank you, Rita. Apologies for overrunning.
Thank you, Tony. And you've raised so many thought-provoking points: the need to change values, and also stop this handful of billionaires, as it were, dictating things according to their terms and making money out of war. So there's a mass of us to think about. And maybe now I can invite Joseph Gerson, peace and disarmament activist, president of Campaign for Peace, Disarmament and Common Security. From what you heard, it'd be very interesting to hear what you have to say on what's been said so far and your own thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Good enough. So I'm in a way, first of all, just to thank you for the invitation. And it's good to be seeing some old friends, both on the panel and in the audience. So I'm glad to see you. I'm glad in some ways to be coming immediately after Tony, because in some ways I want to respond to some of the things that he said. I think we need to understand that, as Tony said, we're in many ways at an abyss. And many years ago, I had a professor who described the study of international relations as being analogous to the rules of the game among mafia families. And I think that very much describes the moment now. Obviously, we're in a period where the United States is trying to reinforce its global hegemony, but we're dealing with other mafia forces as well, committed to their nation, their group, their power, their privilege, and trying to take advantage of the decline of U.S. power. And just to quickly kind of run through kind of structurally the crises that we face, we're in a Thucydides trap with China, the inevitable tensions between a rising and declining power that have often led to wars. With Russia, we have the effort for Russia to break out of the encirclement by the United States with NATO, also the tensions in the Baltic and Black Seas, as well as in Ukraine, the expansion of NATO. The Gaza war, grows out of 75 years of repression of Palestinians, and the relative decline of the United States in the region, have reinforced with its pivot to Asia and the increased focus there, which creates ways to challenge the U.S. and its allies there. And we are in a situation in which, as Medea was saying, the Middle East war could escalate, right? It could escalate even to a U.S.-Israel versus Iran war, with the possibility that nuclear weapons could be used. And Tony, as much as I love what you said, I think when you look at strategic planners and the Pentagon and other countries, they do still foresee the possible use of nuclear weapons. In Asia, we face the possibility that an accident or incident around Taiwan or in the South or East China Seas could lead to escalation. I recently was asked to review a draft paper for the Stimson Institute, one of the leading think tanks in Washington. I was astounded because it is basically arguing for the ultimate use of nuclear weapons, either by the United States or China, in their struggle for control over Taiwan in the case of a crisis. We're facing still the dangers of horizontal or vertical escalation in the Ukraine war, and with Korea, again, you face similar dangers in terms of an accident or miscalculation, and beyond where we are, where we have, at least we think we have some influence. There is the tensions between India and Pakistan. India's cold start policy and Pakistan's nuclear responses to that. So I want to deal with those structural problems. Some time ago, Noam Chomsky said, looking at both the nuclear and environmental threats to human existence, he said that there's a feasible solution to every threat that we face. And I would love to be utopian. I would love to be in a situation where we had achieved the lion lying down with the lamb. But I don't expect that's going to happen in my lifetime. And I'm most concerned with how we can prevent a escalation of the wars that we have, the taking of many more lives, and how we can move to bring the great powers, to which I would include Israel, back from the brink. I was involved during the Vietnam War. I was an organizer in a really remote wasteland called Arizona at the time, and took heart and encouragement when Olof Palme, the Prime Minister of Sweden, was opposing the U.S. war in Vietnam. And I later paid a lot of attention as we were dealing with the escalation of the nuclear arms race, moving toward nuclear Armageddon in the late 70s and 80s, when Palme brought together a commission which resulted in a report called Common Security. And that report, and he brought together, it was not just a standard think tank, right? It was leading figures, Georgy Arbatov, who was Gorbachev's leading security advisor, Cyrus Vance, the former Secretary of State of the United States, leading Europeans and others. How do we build back? How do we reverse what was then the spiraling arms race, the preparations for deployment of the SS-20 by Russia, cruise and Pershing missiles by the United States, which brought us literally within minutes of the annihilation of the human race? And what they concluded, after some difficult conversations, but transformational conversations, was that security could not be obtained unilaterally. Economically, politically, culturally, or importantly, militarily, we live in an interdependent world in which no nation can achieve security at the expense of another. And it was that recognition which led over the next 5 years to the negotiation of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, which blocked the deployment of those missiles I mentioned, and which even 2 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall ended the Cold War. And so now, as we face a series of other existential crises, I would argue that it's time for us to bring back the memory, the paradigm of common security. In a conversation last night, Ann Wright, the former U.S. colonel and diplomat, said, "Look, after wars, militaries study what went right, what went wrong, and try to discern lessons from those wars, and then they forget them. And this is the time for us to be remembering the lessons of common security." What I want to go here, my time. Maybe I'll just kind of run through what are some of the possibilities that we face in terms of calm security negotiations. I'm going to be clear. I don't expect this is easy, right? We're dealing with huge imperial powers, huge economic forces, as Tony was saying, and they don't go around hugging and kissing one another unless maybe their names are Biden and Netanyahu. But there are a number of ways that we can go. I mean, obviously, with the Gaza war, it's urgent to win a ceasefire. It's in nobody's real interest to be pursuing a war. It is not going to be a cakewalk for Israel, even if they bomb and flatten Gaza to rubble. In the end, this is going to redound badly on Israel's already a pariah nation. And as we can see, with no Arab leader being willing to meet with Biden, it only increases U.S. Isolation and disgust in the world. So with the ceasefire, it doesn't necessarily bring a total solution, but it means that we can lift the siege. That children and others who are dying from dehydration, facing the threat of cholera, can live. It means opening to more than 20 trucks, the bringing of humanitarian aid. And it opens the way for diplomacy to free hostages and prisoners, and to lay the foundations for longer-term negotiations that have been rejected, denied, resisted for years, to finally resolve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one growing out of colonialism, and I would say out of European colonialism, on the basis of self-determination, mutual respect, and independence for both peoples. As we look at the U.S.-China, which is more than just U.S.-China, right? I mean, we've got a series of alliances there. Japan is now already has the sixth biggest military spender in the world, and now with the trilateral alliance between the United States, Korea, and Japan, and on the other hand, you've got another trilateral alliance between North Korea, China, and Russia. We need to move to de-escalate, pull back on the competing provocative military exercises that all sides are doing around Taiwan, in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea between Japan and China, and so on. These signals can be sent as a way to begin to open negotiations. We need to encourage them, and we need to. I mean, it was interesting. Secretary of the Treasury, Yellen, when she was in China for negotiations earlier, I think it was late summer, said, "Look, the world is big enough for China and the United States, and that's the vision we should be raising. Otherwise, we're into a race to the bottom." In terms of the Ukraine war and the U.S. and Russia, I mean, look, the reality is that time is not on Ukraine's side. Their counteroffensive became a stalemate. Economic support for the war from the United States and more weapons are increasingly in jeopardy. And if you just look at relative populations between Ukraine and Russia, or relative economic bases, it's not on Ukraine's side. And so this is a time for us, as Medea was saying, as we called for in Vienna, to be pushing for a ceasefire and negotiations. And the way forward here, and Russia, I think there were multiple drives for Russia's invasion. Obviously, one was the expansion of NATO, but also, there's a deep. You don't become the world's biggest country across 12 time zones by being gentle and nonviolent. You have a deep thrust of imperialism within Russia's ideology and culture, and you also have Putin looking to reinforce his political authority amidst the war. But the answer here was obvious. I think it means recognizing the sovereignty of Ukraine. It means probably a dirty deal in which those areas. I mean, Ukraine is never going to get Crimea back. We should just forget that. And the idea of pursuing a war to get Crimea back is insanity. And that's where the Russians have drawn their nuclear line. But I think the reality is one way or another, even if we don't have a negotiated agreement, but just to end hostilities, that means Russia will, at least for some time, continue to control those portions of the regions they claim to have annexed under their authority. It doesn't need to be recognized by other countries. Their future resolution can be, as they say, put on a diplomatic shelf. And centrally, I think Ukraine needs to remain a neutral nation as provided for in its constitution, with security guarantees that are credible. In relationship to Korea, the almost you would call the humiliation of Kim Jong-un by Trump and Bolton at the Hanoi summit has absolutely shattered any trust on the part of the North to pursue diplomacy and negotiations. So what needs to be done in this regard is to begin the process of trust building. How do you do that? You begin by reducing the provocative military exercises by the United States, South Korea, and United States, Japan, and South Korea, designed to demonstrate the ability to not only conquer North Korea, but to topple the Kim dynasty, and to move to declare, finally, after 70 years, the end of the Korean War, which can then provide the basis for negotiating a peace agreement and ultimately not only denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but a nuclear weapons free zone in the region. And then finally, we face the, I see a piece of paper which is maybe telling me time, I'm not sure. But then finally,
yes, I'm afraid we're well over time at the moment. So yeah.
One last, I am at my last comment, which is to say, in relation to the U.S. and NATO on one side, Russia on the other, the absolute urgency to begin strategic stability negotiations and moving toward possibly a renewed meeting of the OSCE, Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, in 2025, which could begin to design a new architecture for European security. So thank you. Sorry to go on over time, and I hope what I had to say was helpful.
Thank you very much. Your comments were definitely helpful because they were very realistic as well as to how to move forward. So that I think there's all of us to have to sort of think of what we do forward. Now, could I invite David Swanson, Executive Director, World Beyond War, Advisory Board Member, Nobel Peace Prize Watch author, War is a Lie. So welcome, David Swanson.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope you can hear me okay. For Western media consumers, Yemen, Syria, Sudan, Azerbaijan, and various other ongoing wars might as well not exist. But Joe Biden is seeking money from the US Congress for 4 wars at once so that he can pay the world's largest merchants of death to ship massive piles of free weapons to Ukraine, Israel, and even if it's not a war yet, Taiwan, plus to what might as well be a war in the US infotainment system, the fascistified US border of Mexico. The thinking, if I may call it that, is that while a handful of Congress members may find the decency or some perverse partisan reason to finally oppose one war, hardly any of them will oppose 4 at once. So, unless something anti-racist or pro-transgender rights, or perhaps a half-sentence disrespecting Donald Trump can be snuck into the bill, we will see another $100 billion for death, enough money to transform the world if applied to hunger or homelessness or environment. This many wars playing simultaneously on the worst media outlets I have seen in my lifetime has got the war is always everywhere, there ain't nothing we can do about it crowd rolling in clover. And the pinkerists whose phony stats claim war has almost vanished, scratching their inflated heads. There is an eerie silence from the if things would only get a little worse, things would get better crew. Joseph just mentioned mafia values in foreign policy. Revenge is out in the open. You won't find it in a single just war theory treatise from the past 2,000 years, but there is not a corporate media outlet or repeat guest who doesn't find revenge a total moral and legal sanction for war. They have seen too many movies in which violent revenge solves everything. Movies in which weaponry has advanced a millionfold, men have fistfights every day, and yet life remains. Movies in which people live happily or tentatively ever after, even though in every single life in the real world, the ending is death. In the real world, an eye for an eye leads as inevitably as death to leaving the whole world in nuclear winter. In the real world, despite sides being unequal and having different grievances and understanding that governments are not populations, not a single population on Earth is well represented by its government, we consistently see two sides of wars agreeing on the irrational choice of a cycle of violence that leads to death. And if you ask them whether they know that violence is counterproductive on its own terms, they do not answer, but scream at you the ancient and meaningless question, would you deny me the right to fight back? Then you carefully back away, because how could you deny them an imaginary concept? But it is clear they do not want your advice, which you could give them. The cycle of violent revenge that leads to death along the way leads to such things as celebrating Nazis in the Canadian Parliament, and to what passes for public intellectuals in the United States advocating the denial of all food and water to the world's largest concentration camp as a defense of the rules-based order. Or is it rules-based murder? We are also treated to the reductio ad absurdum of humane and proper war. The rules-based murder team is simultaneously shipping over the weapons with which to obliterate a population and trucks full of food and water that are as likely to be bombed as if they were a hospital. To which Genocide Joe will reply, the other team did it, coach. Take a bench, Joe. Have a seat. Step aside. It turns out we didn't need a demented invertebrate corporist hack after all. Our mistake. So what is the response to the new spotlights shining on the absurdity of war, lighting the nocturnal monster of militarism up brighter than the sun? Well, it's mixed. Many people, and just about everyone in corporate media, are tragically and ridiculously backing one side of each war. If you're not for Israeli missiles, you're for Hamas missiles. If you're not for Ukrainian missiles, you're for Russian missiles. Of course, this doesn't make any of the missiles faster or larger, but it does give the other side the justification to continue. The very idea of opposing both sides of a war, of treating war itself as the only enemy, is so incomprehensible that my friend Yuri Shelyazhenko is being prosecuted by the heroic Ukrainian democracy for supporting the Russian invasion in a statement in which he does not support and, in fact, explicitly condemns the Russian invasion. Many people, and just about everyone in corporate media, are missing the ongoing lesson that weapons and bases and provocations lead toward and not away from war, in order to argue that the solution when you're in a hole is to keep on digging. Over the past 10 months, neither Russia nor Ukraine has conquered enough territory to hold the graves of the people lost conquering it. And yet both sides are just moments away from complete victory if you'll just close your eyes and believe. Oh, and send more weapons. Many of those people who don't want to send more weapons want to send them to different wars. So the 4 wars at a time legislation is perfect for them. Many others want to stop what they call aiding Ukraine, which nation they imagine bitterly and jealously turned into the sort of socialist paradise they claim to despise. And instead, they want all the money spent on the 4% of the world's people who are worth any more than a warm bucket of spit, namely the US public. While I generally lose no sleep over reports that US students can't do math, sometimes I do wish that $1 trillion a year were explained in the sort of detail that is applied to votes for a House Speaker. If it were, there would be no need to demand that the money be spent in one place rather than another. It's easy to get discouraged as old crusty warmongers you thought had died when you were a kid are wheeled out to comment on and profit from each war. and as identity politics is further entrenched through war support and opposition alike. And yet, people, lots and lots of people, those qualified by having just stumbled out of the rubble in Israel and otherwise, masses of people risking arrest, people turning out in the streets just as people do in normal countries, people surrounding the White House and the Capitol, crowds of diverse and heartwarming people are getting and saying and doing everything exactly right. Horribly insufficient as the response is to a publicly celebrated genocide in Gaza, it is not in the United States as bad as the response to the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So, in the words of the late, oh my fucking God, he's still with us, George W. Bush, is our children learning? Maybe. The question I want to answer is whether anyone is following the logic of opposing both sides to where it leads. If you've understood that denouncing the mass slaughter of civilians by two sides of war is not only the right thing to say, but honestly, the right thing to believe. And if you've exclaimed that, quote, it's not a war, it's something worse, but also notice that we've been exclaiming that during just about every war since World War I, then do you follow the logic where it leads? If both sides are engaged in immoral outrages, if the problem is not whichever side you've been trained to hate, but war itself, and if war itself is the biggest drain on resources desperately needed, thereby killing more people indirectly than directly, and if war itself is the reason we are at risk of nuclear Armageddon, and if war itself is a leading cause of bigotry and the sole justification for government secrecy and a major cause of environmental destruction and the big impediment to global cooperation, and if you've understood that governments do not train their populations in unarmed civilian defense, not because it doesn't work as well as militarism, but because they are afraid of their own populations, then you are now, congratulations, a war abolitionist. And it is time we set to work, not saving our weapons for a more proper war, not arming the world to protect us from one club of oligarchs getting richer than another club of oligarchs, but ridding the world of wars, of war plans, of war tools, and of war thinking. Goodbye, war. Good riddance. Let's try peace.
Thank you, David. That really was a call, a fiery, passionate call that we should all heed. Maybe this is the time just to mention that there are leaders, and there have been, like, for example, Martti Ahtisaari, the former Finnish president, Nobel Peace Prize winner, and he fought for peace. He was in charge of the government. Why can't we have more leaders like that around the world? Maybe that's something someone can address at some stage. May I now invite Clive Wilson, author of Leading Beyond Sustainability, partner Prime East Limited. So looking forward to hearing from you, Clive.
Thank you so much, Rita, and thank you, VJ, for your kind invitation for me to be here, and thank you the other speakers for such an informative and inspiring set of contributions. I'm going to share my screen, if I may. The host has disabled participant screen sharing. Can you allow me to share my screen, Bernie?
Yes, let me just deal with that. Right. Okay. Right.
How are we doing, Bernie?
I'm trying to figure out how to do this.
It was working before the start of the conference.
Yeah. Let me just see. Hold on a second. Hang on.
Clive, I've done it.
Yeah, got it.
Carry on.
Yeah,
Carry
done.
on.
Try now, Clive. Can you do it now?
I can indeed.
Great, lovely.
Right.
Sorry for
So,
the delay.
first of all, VJ kindly had a conversation with me a few days ago. I was doing some research for my new book, and the book is called Leading Beyond Sustainability, 6 Aspirations for a Brighter Future. And I want you to notice the words on the title screen there. Every time we notice, encourage, and celebrate somebody who is changing the world, we are changing the world. And the question is, what sort of world do we want to change towards? And this is where I would require some input from you. So those of you that have got smartphones, point them at the screen there towards the QR code, or go to slido.com and put in the code and just answer that question. What do you see in your brighter future, your paradise here on earth? Just put in single words, short phrases, and we'll build a cloud up of the world that we all want to see. So when you're ready, just go for it and put some words into that cloud. It might take a minute or two for the first few to come through, but I did this exercise literally this afternoon at a conference in Cambodia, and it was really interesting to see what people came up with. So what do we see in our brighter future? And surprise, surprise, this being a peace conference, peace was the first word on the screen. So do keep these things coming. So put your inputs in. And I would encourage you as well, as this is happening, to watch what is going on in the screen and to do something that sounds a bit unnatural. And that is to listen with your eyes. So look at the words that are coming on the screen. And if you agree with them, start typing the same word, because Slido will give you automatically the opportunity to select the same word. It'll almost complete it for you. So see what is coming, see what you agree with, and put it into Slido through your handset. And I would encourage you, I know this is a conference about peace, but a lot has already been said, and Tony touched on it, that actually we live in a very interconnected world, and one thing is dependent upon another. You know, we need an abundance of materials if we're going to have a world that we're not fighting over. So what is it that you see in your perfect paradise, your brighter future? Some fantastic things coming on here. So, and I can see love, sustainability, compassion, the obvious one of peace, protecting nature. Keep them coming as fast as you can put them in. Put as many entries as you like in. This will begin to build a picture of the world that we all want to see. And while you're doing that, I'll just mention that I've been doing this since the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals came out in 2015. I started to go around institutions, universities, schools, professional institutions, companies. I've engaged with people from the age of 7 to well over 70 to find out what sort of a world people want to see. And the amazing thing is we actually all want to see the same world. So keep these things coming and take a look and notice what is coming into that word cloud. Now, because of time, I'm going to move on and give you a summary of what that world looks like. So thinking back to what was in the word cloud, what I'm writing about in my new book, Leading Beyond Sustainability, is 6 aspirations for a brighter future. And what I've tried to do is to condense all that input that I've had over these years into 6 simple aspirations for our better world. And so the 6 aspirations very quickly are connection, which includes physical connection like the internet and social media, but it also includes collaboration, compassion, love and kindness, all that emotional connection. It includes peace, which I define as no war, and a declining level of violence throughout the world. Vitality being health and well-being, not just for us as people, but for all of life, and including the planet that we live on. and abundance of everything that we need to live our best lives: food, water, energy, services, and wealth, opportunity for learning, growth, and contribution, and wisdom to do the right thing the right way at the right time. That's what the book's all about. In part one of the book, there is a chapter on each of these aspirations. And I'm not going to go through the whole lot simply because of time. What I will say is that I've done the analysis as well to see whether those 6 aspirations cover the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, which you can see on the screen there. And what I want you to notice is that the one of the 6 aspirations that doesn't have any goals directly attributable to it is wisdom. And that is really important. And I've got a whole section in the book about wisdom and how we make it happen. The future is not what we're expecting. You know, we think we live in a world of doom and gloom. And to be honest, with the situation in terms of violence and wars right now, we can be forgiven for thinking that the world is becoming far more violent. But take encouragement from the research from places like the Rethink X think tank in California, the work of Steven Pinker, who encourages us to look at the data before we jump to conclusions about where the world is heading. And Adam Dorr, whose book Brighter takes us down an investigation into major disruptions that are affecting our world as we know it already. So I'm just going to quickly go through just one aspiration, the aspiration of peace, and look at some of the data. I'm not going to dwell on this, and I do take the point that we are seeing a significant blip in the data in terms of deaths in state-based conflicts. But look at that between 1946 and 2020, how the deaths have actually declined. And I have made some notes on there to acknowledge the 500,000 Russian and Ukrainian soldiers who have been sadly killed and injured in the war. And of course, we could add into that what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now. But look at the homicide rates across the world since 1300, going to 2010. I mean, we live overall in a far less violent world than we have ever lived. And what I try to do in my book is to celebrate people I've met who are making the world a better place. And I would encourage each one of us to do the same, especially the people here on this conference today. We all know people who are crying out for a peaceful world. And one of the people I celebrate in my book is VJ. He kindly sent me a copy of his book, How Not to Go to War. I couldn't put it down. And I was so inspired by the thought of establishing departments for peace and peace centers worldwide. If every government, whether it's a national, international, or local government, has a department for peace who are seeking out potential conflict and being proactive to do something about it, then the world would move in the right direction. People that I also celebrate, Satish Kumar, whose lectures at the Schumacher lectures I attended a few years ago, who also set out to walk between the then nuclear powers of Moscow, London, Paris, Washington, taking bags of tea to have with world leaders to encourage nuclear disarmament. And closer to home, you probably know about Peace Through Music, the Playing for Change movement. And my own daughter there, Helen Wilson, she's a musician with her flute. She's played in orchestras to try and promote the idea of having a society that is balanced between profit and prosperity and sustainability. My friend Chris Burford, you know, we don't have to go far to find people that we know who are trying to make the world a more peaceful place. And peace begins within our hearts. And what Chris does, he brings groups of men together to actually meditate and to share stories and experiences with a view to making the world a more peaceful place. Mark Jessel is a man I first met at the British Council. He involved me in dialogue in the Middle East and in Africa to try and encourage intercultural harmony. He is now the Chief Systems Integrity Officer at the Forestry Services Commission, and he leads multicultural international groups of people to try and protect our forests and make good use of them. I say far more about these stories in my book. Owen Wibberley and Jesse Rao. Owen is one of my colleagues at Prime East. He's a master of culture change. And one of the things he does is he allows organizations to measure their cultural profiles and compare them to the profiles of other countries around the world, so that when people go and work from one country to another, they know what to expect and they can get information to help modify their behaviors so as not to cause conflict at work. When I spoke with Owen and Jesse, who works for Aperion, who provides some of these diagnostics, and we talked about how they were in the business of peace building, not just culture change, but peace building, that was quite a revelation. So I just want to thank you for your attention in that brief presentation. And I want to finish with a very short poem. And the poem is called Peace. With an eerie crack, the last bullet was shot, and the last casualty bit the dust of the battlefield. The news came on X, previously known as Twitter, that the war was over. What happens next? Silence, and then, in the distance, a bird sang, more sweetly than ever. And then a bell rang from a church in the east and another to the north, like an overture. Then tears of joy and of sorrow, men ran to embrace each other. No war, just a new tomorrow. We can play football again. We can go back to work again, holiday in each other's countries again, spend time with our families again. Make sure this never happens again. Never, ever again. Thank you.
Thank you, Clive. That was such a powerful, motivating, inspiring presentation. So thank you very much indeed. Before we come to the question and answer session, could I invite, please, Roger van Swanenberg, former editor, Pluto Press, to give a response. Thank you. Is Roger here? I can't see him. Bernie, can you see him?
Yeah,
Anybody?
I'm looking,
I can't
I'm
see
looking.
him, but he's here.
Right.
Roger van Zwanenberg. Let me
Yes.
look, see now. You've got so many people here now.
I did see him at the start, but he's disappeared.
It would help, Rita, if you would have advised me in advance of who you wanted to be speaking. Then I could
I
have...
thought you had the program already.
No, I
In fact-
haven't. No, I did ask you earlier, but let me see if I
Oh,
can find...
I mean, I'm just following the program that Vijay
Yes,
did.
you're
But
doing
while
great.
you
You're
do
doing...
that,
Yeah,
can we then show the film by Marla and Kasha?
yeah.
1.5. And while we do that, you could perhaps find Roger van Zwanenberg.
I hope so.
Right? Thank you.
Okay. I don't think even Marla and Kasha are here to show the film. So you can straight away start with the Q&A.
Okay. Well, there's a lot to take in. So many ideas, so many proposals, so many approaches that it's just been astonishing, Vijay. I mean, each speaker has come up with fresh ideas, insights, and ways forward. So now shall we start with the Q&As, and who would like to come forward with a question? Or what
Tom?
can we...
Unmute Tom.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, Tom.
Yes.
Right. Well, there are answers and questions. First of all, Joseph Gerson mentioned common security, and I would like to tell him that our humble peace group in the UK, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, adopted a resolution on common security last year, and literally we've been working on the paradigm in our communities ever since. So it is not lost on us the importance of that particular movement, I would say, that was started all those years ago. And the arts, you mentioned the arts. Well, literally in November, I'm a member of St Albans Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, and we have an exhibition literally on nuclear disarmament in our local library. It's only a small issue, but artists put their work in, and it's very popular. So, as I say, those lessons in our small communities are being learnt, and we hope, and starting this next week, there was this concept years ago in the Green Movement about local and global, and that very much is the part of an approach that we've got, that we are taking global ideas, global problems, and trying to find the best arguments to relate them to our local councillors. And some are just not interested, for example. But we've got a few who are developing that with us. And in a small way, I think we are beginning to change our culture. And I say that because Mr. Rishi Sunak was in Israel today, but his rating at home is extremely low. The money spent on welfare has been reduced. The money spent on warfare in the UK has been increased, and people are noticing this, and they're not very happy with it. I would say, in terms of what Tony was saying about nuclear weapons, the idea of nuclear deterrence is a complete failure. Nuclear deterrence has failed, and people don't know what to put in its place. And we keep hearing this mantra every time a Tory speaks in our country: nuclear deterrence. It's meaningless. It has failed. But people are not recognizing that in political circles, they are in activist circles. So I'd like to thank you all really for a very, very inspiring set of discussions and inputs. I've been taking notes literally constantly, and don't be surprised if you hear some of your phrases from a peace group meeting in the UK. There are some wonderful peace activists around the world, and just us all getting together, that is an inspiration in itself. So thank you so much, VJ. I feel inspired to work even harder, and I put a lot of hours into it already. So thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Tom, very much. I can see Gray, is it Southern's hand raised?
Nancy was next.
Okay, well, I'll leave you to then get the speaker questioners.
Yeah.
So who
Nancy?
Okay, thank you. So greetings, everyone. My name is Nancy. I'm a university professor that works on social justice education and trains language pre-service teachers. So we have been analyzing the situation in my classes. And then our government, our president, Presidente Petro, has already proposed to the United Nations to create 2 peace forums, in order for addressing, on the one hand, the war between Ukraine and Russia, and on the other hand, what's going on between Israel and Palestine. So I was wondering if within this group or GAMIP or any other organizations, you have been having this kind of sort of conversations or on what we could do in a more effective way. Because of course we feel a lot of helplessness. We wish that we could do more. Of course, we are doing our part, in training pre-service teachers with this social justice mentality, understanding the complexities of all this war. But as we were talking with Alicia in private, so we are aware that part of the oppressive system is sustained by these political and economic agendas of the most powerful countries in the world. So the big question for us is, how do we move the perils of these oppressive socio-political and economic systems in more effective ways. If there are tons of organizations that promote peace, the United Nations and other organizations, but they don't seem to be effective in their actions or in their dialogues or in mediating in these war conflicts. So that's the question number one that we have. So why aren't these organizations effective, or how could we mobilize as organizations in more effective ways so that we could be heard, and that this wars could be stopped? Because frankly speaking, like, we are helpless again, because we don't see what are the effective actions of these organizations. What for so many peace organizations if we are not being having the real conversations and moving the perils of these oppressive systems? And I will keep in mind what some of the ideas that resonated with me in terms of this cultural practices that we are intending to transform, also tied to this identity politics, because that's something that's in between, that's very complex on this identity construction that is informed and mobilized by this, as I was saying before, political and economic agendas of those in power. Thank you so much.
Okay, great.
Would anyone, oh yes, okay. But I don't know, I wondered if before that, anyone in the panel would like to address some of the points raised by Nancy. Anyone raise their hand? Any on the panel?
I'm very happy to say something, Rita,
Yes.
because Nancy, I really empathize with the situation you find yourself in. And one of the things that I would say is that the world is complex and the world is connected. And so one of the things that I would urge is do whatever is in your heart, find a way of making that happen, and also look around to see who else is doing something similar to you that resonates, that you can join forces with. And I think that's a good way forward. One of the things I did in 2015 when the Sustainable Development Goals came out was I set up a branch of the United Nations Association because I thought it would be a convenient vehicle to try and promote that better world. Now, I'm not saying that that's the right way or the best way. All I'm saying is do something. If you feel so moved, take that confidence, get others around you, see what else is going on, and join forces.
Thank you very much, Clive. Now, Bernie, unless you've got a different order in mind.
We've got Gray waiting.
Yes, I've seen Gray, and you're in New Zealand, and I think you should get priority. Is it very late at night or early in the morning there? Anyway, Gray, do come up, give us your question.
Oh, yes. Thank you. I'm really impressed with with everything that's come out, and I support it. But I think there's a couple of things that warrant a little more attention, and that is the overall concern about security, and the fundamental belief within many societies is security is given by military power. And this is embedded in an enormous amount of history, a lot of very relevant experiences, and along with our literature and many other factors, confirm this belief, this association of the military gives us security. It's not rational, it's very emotional. And that is a belief that we've got to recognize, understand, and work with, and bring that to work beyond that to realization that security is much, much more than military activity, and the military is actually a threat. The other factor is, and I think Clive Wilson is paying a lot of attention here, but recognize our successes, our development of the EU, and VJ has written on this, but very, very, very few people seem to have written in any success. The OSCE, who's been talking about that? It's perhaps it's very it's unsuccessful, but it's still working. It's got 50 countries belonging to it. We don't hear about it. And the other factor is that we are preoccupied with conflict, and the conflict is terrible. It needs attention, but we ignore the ongoing cooperation between nations. And it's the way nations cooperate, how they relate, and develop trust, and these sorts of things are really crucial processes which are ongoing and exist extensively, but we pay very little attention to them.
Thank you, Greg. Would we say next? Would we say is Holly Weeks, Bernie? Can you
Okay, yes, I'll unmute for Holly. Holly, can you unmute, please?
Possible to send him a message or a text?
No, I'm just
Got it.
there you
Thank
go.
you.
We got you. We got you. Yeah.
Sorry, I'm at the VA.
That's okay. That's
New
okay.
York does not invade New Jersey. Montana does not invade North Dakota. While Oregon would like to stop Californians from coming up, they don't. And it's because we have a common law. It would seem to me
Oh, your audio's frozen.
So we move on and then maybe try and get back to Holly?
Yeah, I think he's lost his connection.
There I am.
Yeah, I mean, he's, oh yes.
Oh, hang on, hold on.
With us, exactly. Well, you told us about common law.
Yes. And it seems that if we want peace, the only get to peace would be having common law. That's codified, that's adjudicated, and that's enforceable. I don't know how else we can get to peace. You know, but any place there's a widespread common law, there's decreased violence. So unless that takes place on an international level, nationalism will always be the problem. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I now invite C. Barbie?
Okay. Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, we got you. Yeah, lovely.
All right.
Right. Hello.
Huh. Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Are you happy?
Yes, we
yeah.
Well, at least some say yes. Happy by
Yes, we are happy. We're happy.
or by nature. Sometimes I wonder why I come at these peace conferences. I certainly do not come to count bullets, weapons, and deads. That makes me sick. I don't come to hear big and small makes each other. That makes me state-bound. I'm not. I don't come to heal trauma, fear, or how bad the world is, or how bad they are. We all need to build peace. I don't come to be told what we need or what we have to do. This enslaves me. I don't come to hear how much the people, I mean everybody, the humans, are foolish. That drives my heart and my head as well. I don't come to hear long discourses over an hour and a half. You're lucky I stayed. And I don't come to advocate for my book, though I could. So why do I come? I come because peace is possible. Okay, anybody who disagrees here needs some more inner peace work. And this peace is a value. But every time we're not saying I'm nonviolent enough or peaceful enough to claim, maybe as a human right, make it wide, that I'm peaceful, we still have works to do on ourselves. And this is very important because the images we produce is what we're going to get, no matter what. peace is for people, right? So it's people who are going to make peace. And that's not them up there in the big seat, them down there in the rumble. It's you and me. How we talk to each other, how we make peace amongst ourselves. And we are 8 billion or more at every second. But it's 8 billion people who need to learn peace. And it's not going to happen from the media, from down up. It's going to happen because we shake hands with people, because we look at them in the eye and we test their peace once in a while. Peace is never ending. It goes both ways. If you really master your peace, there's very little chance you'll get taken out of it. But on the same side, it's never won. Peace is an ongoing process. Peace goes on as you see a kid hitting another kid. This can be natural. Or you see people spreading their fears, and whatever happens there, I don't want to know. These people need a reassurance, or they need a little bit to be taught not to hit themselves or not to hit others. That's what I do with kids and adults, honestly. But it also says that peace is a win-win procedure. Mediate, cooperate, give up the Manichaeism, give up the dichotomy. Every time you feel separation, you're not at peace. Go back to the meditation space and unite. That's what we were. That's where we were high. And do be a little bit preventive, including with yourselves. Don't let violence happen. Be courageous. I heard the word courage. Yeah. Be conscientious objectors before teachers, theorists, or whatever. It's on the ground that it happens. It's not in the big heads. It's in the big hearts. Well, teach peace. I think I'm done. I said 14 things in, I don't know, I didn't count, 2 minutes. I hope I was clear, and I hope we can talk about it every year, and we can show progress to each other. I've spoken.
Thank you. I think it's in our hands, as you say. Peace is possible. Bernie, do you want to say something?
Yes, briefly, Rita. First of all, to thank everyone whose marvelous contributions to the discussion. I was watching, I was observing a lady by the name of Linda Greenfield Johnson at the United Nations, who was the American representative there. And this resolution to provide humanitarian aid to Gaza, one person stood out to me who supported this was Lula da Silva, who is the president of Brazil. Now, Lula da Silva is part of an organization called BRICS, B-R-I-C-S, which is also working together with the Association of East Asian Nations, the Community of Latin American Countries. Now, we were talking about cooperation rather than confrontation, to transform confrontation into cooperation, this kind of alchemy for peace. Now, it appears to me that this global majority, which is emerging, it represents, I would estimate, somewhere in the region of about 85% of the people on the planet who reject the idea of hegemony in any form. So my dream, all right, is that as this Western imperial colonial project continues to fail, as we are witnessing with what's going on in France and elsewhere, that we do not want another situation where we have an East and Western bloc facing off against each other. We need to use our powers of diplomacy and persuasion to convince the Western powers that their model is not sustainable, and that if they would join this new paradigm of developments, of a complete overhaul of the financial system, a complete overhaul of economic operation, that we could actually start to see an end to this idea that what David Swanson very correctly identified as rules-based murder, all right, that is imposed under the idea that we know what's good for you all, and if you don't toe the line, then you know what you'll get what for. So my question is, how realistic do members of the panel think that it's possible to persuade, you know, to enlighten it? See, the Western leaders have lost their minds. We can see this quite clearly regarding this idea that this situation in Palestine, which I'm not going to go into the history of, but we all know the history of it. It goes right back to the 19th century with Theodor Herzl. But how can we persuade our leaders in the West to wake up to the fact that they have to reform the tenets they hold in their hearts regarding the way they relate to other countries in the world? That's my question. Thank you.
And who among the panelists would like to answer the question?
David.
Okay, David, do you want to
Let me
answer?
unmute you, David.
David Swanson, yes. Okay,
No,
David.
got you there.
Yeah, I think it's not principally a matter of persuading people with persuasive argument. People who have demonstrated quite clearly that they have virtually no conscience, no principles, nothing they will die for. People who are willing to, you know, to endorse outright genocide and to blatantly lie about it without the slightest concern of whether anyone believes them or not, are not going to be persuaded simply by the strength of argument. It's going to take what it's always taken with every movement for centuries, nonviolent activist pressure that makes it too difficult to continue this disastrous course, and preferable to those who want to stay in power, if not absolutely necessary for staying in power, to pursue a wiser course. And we should drop the nonsensical belief given to us by them that we don't have the ability to do that, or that we never stop wars, or the fact that they don't have holidays on the calendar every time we've stopped a fucking war doesn't mean we haven't stopped any wars. The reason they want to take this opportunity as an excuse for a war on Iran is because they've unsuccessfully directly marketed a war on Iran 5 to 10 times, and we've stopped them cold. They wanted to carpet bomb Syria. We stopped them. We stopped the construction of military bases and get them closed. Dozens of examples. We stopped weapons shipments. We stopped arms fairs. We shut them down. This notion that we're powerless is the most ridiculous and the worst piece of propaganda, far worse than who blew up a hospital and so forth. It is the critical piece of the propaganda. So, I mean, it just breaks my heart, this notion that we can't do anything unless we've already done it, because it's so dumb. But for victory dependent people, the victories are there by the thousands. We have the problem of both being too small and being told we're 1,000 times smaller than we are. And we shouldn't go along with that second bit. It's so disempowering and unnecessary. So we need to build the people who are right now shutting down the US Capitol and surrounding the White House and saying, no, don't do it. We need to be joining them, and we need to be doing it all around the world. And any government that's lighting up their monuments and capitals with Israeli flags needs to be shamed by everyone who can stand up and walk. You know, this is what it's going to take.
Have we lost? Someone was. Oh, John, you're back again. John Gerson, would you like to offer your question?
So in some ways, I want to agree with David. I mean, it has to do with power from below, in its many forms, and yeah, I think we're seeing some of that in terms of what's hesitated. Part of the hesitation of the Israeli forces going in at this point into Gaza. I mean, what they're doing from the air is mind-boggling. We are in an interesting period here. Yeah, I wanted to kind of respond to an earlier question about law. I mean, the reality is that there is already international law. There are laws of war. There's humanitarian law. And the question is whether it's enforced, whether it's recognized. And part of the question, too, in terms of international law, is who made the law. So one of the major sources of insecurity around the world right now is, look, the so-called rules of the game were dictated by the United States and to a lesser extent its allies, in the late 1940s after the war, the creation of the Bretton Woods system and the rest. And we have to recognize that those laws did not necessarily respect the interests and needs of certainly the global South and many other countries, and that's why it has to be changed. And those of us in the North need to recognize that rather than fight to impose those rules or militarize to impose those rules, we need to be pressing our governments to be pressing for a more fair and just order. Just to say, in terms of the BRICS, I think we need to. I don't think we're going to look at 85% of the world looking for justice and opposed to hegemony. I mean, the reality, unfortunately, is that the Chinese government is also seeking to enforce its hegemony over its sphere of influence over considerable portions of Asia. They've claimed control of their rights to about 90% of the South China Sea at the expense of other countries, and so our commitments to justice, to diplomacy have to be universal, and I think that's important. Maybe the last thing to say has to do with another force of power, which is narrative. It's interesting as you're looking either at the Israel-Gaza war, or as you're looking at the Ukraine war. We're in a kind of an information war to dictate what the narrative is going to be, what people believe, and therefore what they support. And so I think it's really critically important for us to be initiating conversations, whether it's in a small community, whether it's in meetings with government representatives, whether it's in the letters to the editor, whether it's out being on the streets, that are putting forward a different vision. As I said before, I would love to get to a utopia. It's not going to happen in my lifetime. I want to prevent the most immediate threats to human survival, which have to do with the dangers of nuclear war. Increasingly, what happens with AI and cyber, as Tony was indicating, and certainly the climate crisis, and that means having the courage to talk to your neighbor, having the courage to do the writing, the articles. I mean, everybody who's on this call should be writing and holding discussions and trying to change the discourse, because the discourse has a lot to do, and the ideologies behind the discourse have a lot to do with who lives, who dies, and how.
Thank you. Holly, do you still want to say something more? Holly Weeks? Bernie?
Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yes. Go ahead.
If within a nation law works, so California does not invade Oregon, why would it not?
I'm afraid we've lost you, Holly.
Lost the connection again, yeah.
Yes. Can I just move on now? Because there's been a question here from Isaac Newton. I don't know if Isaac's still here. Says, from Isaac Newton, he says, my question goes out to all panelists. What causes breaking of peace agreements when fighting groups are brought on board for peace matters, like in Sudan? Who would like to answer this? Okay, Tony. Can you unmute Tony Robertson?
Yeah, I'm good. I mean, I go back to what I said. I said earlier. There are people with vested interests who have got a receipt, get a benefit from the status quo, and that's why we have these situations. The people around the world, whether it's the leaders of very powerful countries like China, the United States, and Russia, or whether it's smaller countries, these people are led by people who have vested interests in remaining in power, and they have no qualms at all about killing anyone that they need to do in order to remain in that situation of benefit to themselves. And so again, until we find a way to disarm the billionaires, to disarm the oligarchs. I mean, there's a great meme that says if a monkey hoarded 1,000 bananas and stopped other monkeys from eating them, they would take that monkey away and study it to death to try and work out what the hell's going on. This is the world that we live in. And so until human beings, us, ordinary people, wake up and say, you can't have it. You can't have all of your wealth just because you say that you deserve it or you inherited it or whatever. Bullshit. The wealth of the planet is the common good of everyone on this planet. We are all dependent on the fact that hominids millions of years ago managed to bash two stones together to make fire. Yeah, everything comes from there. Yeah. We are all standing on the shoulders of the people who came before us. No one has the right to own billions of dollars or whatever it is. This is the commonwealth of all human beings of society, and we need to find a way to redistribute it. And we need to do that by getting, especially the younger generations, to wake up. And I don't know how we're going to do that, but there has to be, and it will either come, I don't know, through some awful shock to the world like we have been through before with the Second World War, or I don't know, there'll be a moment of inspiration, elaboration, maybe something spiritual, I don't know, that will come along and people will just say, you know what, wait, stop. What are we doing? Because the path that we're going down at the moment is insane. And I'm worried that we've only got about 10 or 15 years left of habitable planet with which to even have these conversations.
It is definitely a wake-up call. Thank you. I've noticed that Andrew Ginestet, to everyone, he said, ask the military to think in a different way and engage in dialogue with them on peace. Do you want to elaborate on that, Andrew?
Yes, I'm fine with that. Thank you. I would like to answer to the question which was just posed to. Can you hear me? Is everything okay?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Good. Point is that we need a complex answer. I studied, for example, the article by Arno Bame, which, for example, talks about the psychological effects of the older brain. Because we come from the animal sequence, so it's like the modern brain is not really fitting together. It's like the old brain and the modern brain are not properly working together, etc. So it's like the answer is a little bit more complex. It's not just the rich people. It's true that the rich people have tribes, and these tribes are like, very ancient tribes. It's exactly the same, it's really, they behave like cavemen. Yeah. But we could influence their behavior if we manage to pour a little bit of oxytocin into their tea. And that is something, we can sneak it in. We don't have to talk about it. It can be done. And then the other thing is that the military, I'm a silent diplomat. I've been within NATO, working hidden away from the general public. I've endured, and my family has endured, a lot of violence because of that. Because every time a peace mediator makes a real peace, he gets visitors. And these visitors are exactly the people about which we are talking, the rich people who make a profit of war. And they burn your home down, they threaten your children and things like these. So it's like, it's not a nice life. Don't envy a silent diplomat, okay? But the point is that I've been talking to the military for many years, for 20 years. And a group of them has changed, not all of them. And the point, again, it's like the peace workers, we are too few, we're a small community. So if we can increase our community, we will have a much larger impact. Here in Germany, we are setting up a project which we call the Competence Center for Peace. And the Competence Center for Peace is being set up in Wuppertal. We are writing strong paradigms of change, not implying that what we propose needs to be done. It's just a thought that we are printing, that we're putting out on the internet, so that people have a very broad idea, very general idea from which we can discuss, and the discussion then elevates to a higher level, okay? So this is something we do, and we do it as a group, of a mixed group of artists, peace activists, scientists. We are transdisciplinary. We are around about 40 people working together every day. And that makes a lot. We are having endless exhibitions. This year, for example, we have 8 exhibitions. It's a lot of work. So we are.
Thank you, Andrew. Because we've only got 1 minute left, have you got a link or something that you can share?
It's all in the chat. I've shared it. Yeah, yes. So it's all in the chat. So,
so we can take note of that. Since we've just got a minute left, literally, Alice, you've been very patient. And do you have a quick question or point to make? And then,
well, I do have a point to make, and I appreciate all the information and thinking we've had. But when we're talking about billionaires, we had monarchies, and then we reformed and we had democracies, and then the democracies got corrupted. So it's always like coming up from the grassroots, where we changed our whole system from the monarchy to the democracy, to now we need another level, and we have to have like an earth institution. I mean, nobody should own land. We got to go back to the indigenous people, like it's not just billionaires. It's like we have to shift the whole system. I don't know whether I guess that's what Andrew is working on in Germany, but we need these good ideas to get people to understand that the way our system is working now, it's not working. And here's the way forward. And it's definitely, there should never be private property. I mean, when we ended the monarchy and we did democracy, everything was imperfect. It still was coming through old consciousness, but we can't be unconscious right now, because Mother Earth is saying, hey guys, wake up, or else, your time is over.
Thank
so
you.
I hope that'll inspire us to move at the grassroots. It's got to be from your community ground up. That's how it's going to happen.
That seems to be the central theme of this discussion, everyone about grassroots. So Vijay, can I invite you to close the meeting, please?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, all the distinguished speakers, Media Benjamin, Tony Robinson, Joseph Gerson, David Swanson, and Clive Wilson, for a thought-provoking and engaging presentations. We have learned a few things from your valuable insight about wars raging in Middle East between Israel and Palestine, and war in Europe between Russia and Ukraine. And also, some of the speakers have elaborated on what measures we can take to stop end these wars, stop bloodshed and killing, for building a peaceful world. We'll be publishing a report of today's conference in the next Uniting for Peace newsletter. So I request all the speakers to please send your contribution to myself. So thank you very much to all of you speakers, and the chair, Rita Payne, who's been ably chairing the meeting today, and thank you for your contribution. Thank you for very much to the committee, volunteers of Uniting for Peace, and all the contributors in the question answer session who have made it a vibrant session and also made the evening a success. Let me say that today, as some of the speakers have already said, private citizens have more power to do public good than ever before because of the rise of internet, campaigning, and the NGOs as a global movement in the developed and the developing world. Our strength is in building citizen power by which we can shape our destinies and the future of the world. So let me thank you all for joining this evening. Activists, thinkers, and change makers. You have been a great audience. Thank you very much for being here today. We hope to see you soon at our next event. And before you go, let me energize you by a few sayings. Mahatma Gandhi said, I believe all wars to be wholly wrong. If war itself is wrong, act. How it can be worthy of moral sport or blessing. And Margaret Mead, as you might have heard before, has said, never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has. And lastly, one of my favorite ones from Dalai Lama, which says, if you think you are too small to change the world, try sleeping with a mosquito. Thank you so much. Yeah. And also, as we are short of funds in Uniting for Peace, I will request you for donations so we can carry on our work for building a peaceful world. Thank you very much, and we hope to see you soon again.
And thank you. Goodbye to all. It's been an honor to share a platform with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. You see? On the right.